Hello, adult Sunday school leader. Have you ever felt backed into a corner? Like you're out of options, there's no place to go. Trouble seems to be pressing in on every side. And that could be from some family issues or personal finances or maybe just the way the culture's going. Maybe even spiritual discouragement. Even in the church, we can feel overwhelmed by opposition or by the weight of our own responsibilities. But what if? What if we could see things the way God sees them? What if we could lift our eyes beyond the here and now and get a glimpse of the resources that heaven has for us? We're going to see that happen in our story this week as we conclude the unit that we've been in called Elisha, Seeing the Hand of God at Work. This is lesson number 5 called God's Hand in Facing Opposition. The focal passage is out of 2 Kings chapter 6. And the point of this lesson is God is more powerful than those who oppose us. In 2 Kings chapter 6, we are introduced to a time when everything looked lost. And then a prayer was offered that changed everything. And the prayer was a simple one. Lord, open his eyes. Now this story shows us a clear picture of God's invisible yet unstoppable power. If you remember from last week, Syria, also known as Aram, and Israel had skirmishes and wars off and on. And even though Israel was in a spiritual decline, God continued to speak and act through his prophet Elisha. The king of Aram was waging war against Israel and kept trying to set traps and ambushes. But something strange kept happening. Every plan he made was somehow known to Israel in advance. Well, as we look at 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 12, we see in these verses that the king of Aram was continually frustrated. Every move he made was somehow known in advance by Israel. He became convinced that there was a traitor in his own camp. But one of his servants revealed that the real reason his plans were failing was because of Elisha, the prophet in Israel. Elisha, he said, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. In other words, Elisha had supernatural awareness because God was revealing things to him. Well, this reminds us that nothing, and we know this, nothing is hidden from the Lord. Psalm 139 tells us that God knows when we sit, when we rise. He perceives our thoughts from afar. Before a word is even on our tongue, he knows it completely. The God we serve sees what no one else can see, including the plots and the plans of our enemies. And he faithfully provides guidance and protection to his people. Now, Elisha's gift was not a result of magic or manipulation. This was not some kind of psychic remote viewing, the kind of thing that was attempted by both the United States and the Soviet Union back during the Cold War. This was the fruit of a close relationship with God. And you know what? God still speaks to those who walk closely with him. Now, while we may not have prophetic visions like Elisha does, we do have the Holy Spirit who guides us into truth and gives us spiritual discernment. Now, once the king of Aram learned that Elisha was the source of his problems, he decided to remove the problem. He decided to remove Elisha. Now, verse 14 tells us that he sent horses, chariots, and a great army by night to surround the city where Elisha was staying, which was in Dothan. No, not the one in Alabama, but the one 12 miles north of the city of Samaria. Eliminating the man who somehow knows your military plans might seem like the logical thing to do, but really, it's ignorant, isn't it? If Elisha somehow knew when and where the border raids would take place, then surely he'd know about the scheme to capture him as well. Well, let's look on in 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 15 through 17. Well, the next morning, Elisha's servant got up early, went outside, and saw the terrifying sight of an army encircling the city. So in a panic, he runs back to Elisha and he cried, "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" Now, that's a very human reaction, isn't it? It's probably one I would have as well. When we are surrounded by problems, by opposition, by danger, it's so easy to fall into fear. We see our problems, we see our pain, maybe even the pressures that are going on around us, but sometimes we forget that God is still in control. So, how did Elisha respond? He responded with calm and assurance. He said, "Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Now, you know what? That right there should be your memory verse for the week. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Well, a couple of other verses that come to mind that emphasize this would be Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? Also Psalm 118, verse 6. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? When the servant heard that, it must have sounded unbelievable. He had just seen the enemy army with his own eyes surrounding the town. And Elisha, he wasn't blind. He simply had a different kind of vision. He could see what God was doing behind the scenes. He then prayed one of the most powerful prayers in all of Scripture. Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. And in that moment, the servant's spiritual eyes were opened, and suddenly he could see the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. What he hadn't seen before, what had been invisible to him, was now clear. The army of heaven was present, and it far outnumbered the enemy. That reminds me of the hymn, "Open My Eyes That I May See," and then also the more contemporary song, "Open the Eyes of My Heart." This should remind us of a profound truth that there is always more going on than what we can see. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. That is good news that we need to tuck away and recall when we need it. God's presence surrounds his people, even when we can't see it. Psalm 34:7 says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them." When you feel outnumbered, remember, if you could see the spiritual realm, you'd know that heaven's armies are standing guard. This reminds me of that book that was popular about 40 years ago by Frank Peretti called This Present Darkness. It's a novel, but it paints this picture of angels surrounding us that do all this work that we are not even aware of. And I'm surprised it's never been made into a movie. You might check it out. It is really good reading. Well, anyway, notice what Elisha does next. As the enemy approached, Elisha didn't call for swords, didn't call for spears. Instead, he prayed again, this time for God to strike the enemy with blindness. So God answered that prayer, and Elisha led them straight into Samaria, the capital of Israel. Well, it's a moment of irony and divine reversal. First, Elisha's servant gained spiritual sight, and Israel's enemies are now suffering from physical blindness. Also, the ones who came to capture Elisha are now at his mercy. When the king of Israel saw the captured army, he asked if he should kill them. But Elisha said, "No, would you kill men you have captured with your own sword or bow?" Elisha's pointing out here that these men were prisoners of war. They weren't fighting on the battlefield. You don't kill prisoners of war in cold blood. Instead, he told the king to feed them and send them home. And that's exactly what happened. They were given a great feast and returned to their homeland. And we're told that the bands of Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. This is one of the most unexpected endings to a military encounter in the Bible. God used his power not to crush the enemy, but to demonstrate mercy. Romans 12:20 says, "If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink." And that's exactly what happened here. And it's a testimony not only to God's power, but to his grace. God could have destroyed the Syrians. He could have wiped them out completely. But instead, he chose to show them kindness. And that kindness led to peace, at least for a time. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do isn't to defeat our enemies, but to disarm them with love. So, what can we take away from this story? First, when we're afraid, we need to ask God to open our eyes. Not necessarily to see angels, even though, that would be amazing. But just to see with the eyes of faith. remember that God is with us even when we feel alone. He's fighting for us even when we can't see the battle that's going on. Second, we need to trust the unseen more than the seen. The servants saw the army, but Elisha saw the angels. Faith helps us walk confidently in the promises of God, not in the panic of the moment. Third, we can be the kind of people who help others see. Elisha didn't panic when his servant did. He prayed. He led. He showed mercy. So are you walking closely enough with God that you can help someone else see when they're blind with fear? And finally, sometimes victory doesn't look like conquest. It looks like compassion. The enemy was overcome not by force, but by kindness. God's ways are higher than ours, and his strategy may surprise us. But when we follow his lead, we become participants in his redemptive work. So let's tuck this away. Okay, you may or may not feel surrounded and overwhelmed today, but you probably will at some point. And when you do, remember the words of Elisha: those who are with us are more than those who are with them. A couple other Bible verses here. When you are afraid, remember Psalm 56, verse 3, that says this: when I am afraid, I put my trust in you. But better yet, remember the first part of Isaiah 12, verse 2, that says, surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. Well, next week, we're going to be in a new month, a new quarter, and a new book, and a new unit of study. So for 6 weeks, starting next week, from June through mid-July, we're going to be in a unit called Risk Takers, the adventure of walking by faith. We're going to examine some stories of some biblical characters who showed great faith during various phases in their life. So thank you guys very much for watching. I do appreciate you. Don't forget, pray for and with your class.